Hello, this is a guy who likes fanfiction and is too lazy to read, so here is the Institute Saga 2 in audio form. Check the description for the links to the author. Chapter 21, Breakthrough. Xavier looked curiously at the indentation on the wall, then at Clark. Proof that I'm an idiot. Clark explained with an embarrassed expression. I was trying to beat some sense back into myself. By hammering the wall with his forehead. Peter commented. Sir, we did it. Did what? We managed to find a way to shut down powers at will. Forge grinned. It was while we were examining the remains of that sentinel and how it could detect mutants that we realized, the key was the biofield. Mutants have a certain underlying pattern to their biofield, and if we dampen it in a specific way, the powers stop working. Means that I finally can see in color. A voice added, and Xavier's eyebrows shot up as Scott walked into the room, his eyes perfectly visible. Scott. Indeed. Scott grinned, his eyes crinkling. Oh, I'm still carrying my shades, but this watch that they made for me? It lets me see more than shades of red. We're still running an analysis of Rogue's power signature. It's more complex than Scott's, but we think that within a week at the outside, we'll be able to at least let her touch others without ill effects, and hopefully even duplicate the effects of borrowing powers without actually having to touch people. That would be incredible. Xavier breathed. We've managed to make this one for Jamie. Peter offered, holding up a smaller watch. Once he wears this, he won't have to worry about accidentally duplicating himself unless he wants to. We're planning on having him test it out this afternoon. I see. Xavier smiled. Now, if you'll pardon me, Clark said, glancing at his wrist where the time was displayed on his uniform sleeve in a frequency invisible to most people, I really need to be going. I have a conference to attend. Is why mutants are a threat. Senator Kelly finished triumphantly. At least heroes like Iron Man rely on technology, and even Giant Man was born human. As was Armor. Superman countered, and he looked round to see people staring at him in confusion. She was the girl kidnapped by a group that we still haven't tracked down, a group that used a machine on her that would have killed her had it been active for even a quarter hour more. I was there when she was reunited with her parents. They had been worried sick. Big words from an alien. Kelly sneered, and Superman raised an eyebrow. Thor is an alien too, if you recall, yet like me, he is dedicated to those who cannot defend ourselves. The main difference between us is that he still has a home world he can visit, whereas my birth world is no more. Birth world? The host asked, and Superman shrugged slightly. I was born of Krypton, but raised on Earth by a loving family. I always knew that I was different, but at the same time, I have never held myself as being superior to humans in any way. But you can fly. Kelly started, only to have Superman interrupt. As can Sunspot. And, move very fast. Quicksilver, although he's not one of the good guys, unfortunately. And you're strong. Bruce Banner. Or Spider-Man. He's also agile enough that trying to fight him is almost an exercise in futility. You see, there are humans who can equal what I am capable of and have advantages I do not. I recently had a sparring match with Juggernaut of Genosha. He's almost as strong as I am, and possibly slightly tougher. Of course, his strength is psionically enhanced. And what do you think about his recent proclamation? The host asked, and Superman smiled. An offer of refuge to any mutant or meta who feels threatened in their homeland, so long as they promise to use their powers in ways that do not impact the well-being of others. King Marco has my full support with that one. And why would that be? Kelly sneered. Because people tend to fear what they do not understand. Superman replied calmly. Once you have understanding, you need not fear, but understanding can be very difficult at times. The problem is that fear can easily lead to hate, hate to anger, and anger begets suffering. Given that, is it not a good idea for there to be a place where there is no fear, a place where hatred is unlikely, there is little anger, and people work together to prevent suffering? As America has shown to the world that your gender, your skin color, your religion, or your parentage do not bar you from being able to work to better your own life and the lives of those you care about, Genosha is showing that if you have powers, you can be accepted and welcomed by those who do not fear what you might choose to do with them, because they know that you will choose good. He is getting annoying. Creed growled as he glared at the screen on which Superman was deflecting or disarming most of Senator Kelly's barbed comments. We need to do something about him. No, we need to take down Genosha. Unleash a full Centuria on them. It will make a good combat test. Of course, sir. Trask smirked. Right away. Creed pulled himself out of his chair and walked around the desk. I think that I would like to see this. Of course, sir. Trask said. I have a helicopter waiting to take us to the Castellum. They are magnificent. Creed stated as he leaned against the railing of the balcony, looking across the ranks of sentinels arrayed in groups of 12, the leader of each group instantly recognizable in its armored shell of red and purple. At the front, surrounded by sentinels with reddish-gold highlights, a single titan of red and purple stood motionless. Trask. Creed began and Trask nodded. Enhanced Sentinels. Due to the fact that a Centurion is more valuable than a Decurion, the Sentinels assigned to it have been upgraded and provided with a greater data bandwidth to allow them to be deployed more effectively by the Centurion. If need be, they can also act as replacements for the Decurions, although their command abilities aren't as good. And have they been programmed with their mission yet? The Centurion seemed to straighten as its optics swiveled upwards towards them. Mission has been accepted. Location Genosha. Mission aim, terminate all mutants on island. Special instruction, any human who attempts to fight is to be designated traitor and may be terminated if they pose a threat. Special instruction, any non-mutant meta-human who attempts to fight is to be designated traitor and may be terminated if they pose a threat. Special instruction, any non-human who attempts to fight is to be designated traitor and may be terminated if they pose a threat. Please confirm orders as stated, sir. Confirmed. Creed grinned. All units have been equipped with turbine packs. The Centurion declared. Deployment awaits your command. Bolivar, they are your soldiers, you should have the honor of sending them on their first true strike against the mutant scum. Thank you, sir. Trask said, then he turned to face the robotic soldiers. Soldiers of humanity, confirm systems check. All units report all systems fully operational. The Centurion responded a split second later and Trask nodded with a proud smile. Then go forth and strike this blow for humanity. He shouted as the roof split and started to open above them. Humanity will prevail. Humanity will prevail. The masked sentinels responded and then they activated the turbines attached to their backs, lifting off slowly but accelerating quickly until they vanished into the night sky. Magnificent. Garden Creed whispered. Ah, Magneto. Sinister purred. I have refunded half of the money you paid for the first clone as I am afraid there were a few issues. Rest assured, the next one will be far superior now that I have determined the main problems. What issues? Magneto demanded and Sinister gave a mirthless laugh as he motioned for a figure to step out of the shadows. This is Bizarro. He is as strong as Superman, just as fast and damage-resistant, but his intellect is somewhat lacking, I'm afraid, and he really enjoys fighting just a bit too much. Magneto stared at the gray-skinned near-human, noting the protruding jaw, the raw, almost jagged planes of his face and the purple and blood-red bodysuit with the S symbol reversed. The next one will be far closer to the original. I'm afraid that the Q&A was somewhat more of a problem than I thought. Oh, you might like to know that a covert group has launched an attack on Genosha using more sentinels, those robots you saw attacking that mutant a few days back. If you hurry, you might get there in time to save the Genoshans. And maybe recruit a few new acolytes. Magneto mused. Bizarro. Me Bizarro? The hulking figure rumbled and Magneto nodded. Come with me. I will lead you to some enemies you can fight, and then I will lead you to a truly worthy adversary. Bizarro blinked a few times and Sinister patted him on his shoulder. He said if Bizarro follow Magneto, Bizarro can smash big metal enemies. Bizarro likes smashing. The clone smirked. Bizarro follow Magneto and smash big metal enemies. Excellent. Magneto said as he levitated himself towards the lift shaft. Excellent. Sinister watched the duo depart, then he sighed and turned back to his worktop. Tapping a control, He looked up as the far wall retracted to reveal several angled 3-meter transparent cylinders, each containing a clone in a different stage of growth. "So," he said as he walked over to the first one. "Let's see how things are going." This is looking very promising." "Yes, very promising indeed." Clark pulled his data pad off his belt and blinked at Fury's sober expression on the screen. "What can I get to Genosha, fast?" Cap and Supergirl are already on their way, as are over 100 giant robots with instructions to kill every living thing there. I've already sent a message to Xavier and scrambled the rest of the, what the. The pad landed on the ground as Clark accelerated out of the nearest window, the resulting sonic boom sounding barely 100 meters from the mansion and waking everyone else up as the reinforced windows rattled in their frames. Several people were already getting up when Xavier's voice echoed in their thoughts. "All combat-ready X-Men report to the hangar immediately." The Blackbird sliced through the night, the Kryptonian-enhanced turbines howling as they hurled the aircraft through the edge of the atmosphere, the plane quivering almost at the very edge of its tolerances. "Status on the Avengers." Logan growled as he dropped into the co-pilot's seat after getting changed into his uniform in the back compartment. The Quinjets were too slow, especially since the helicarrier was on the wrong side of America, so Thor is taking them to Asgard and back, Scott said. "However, due to the recharge time needed for the Bifrost Bridge, we'll still be able to beat them to Genosha. Captain America and Supergirl are almost at the island, though, with Superman catching up." Logna looked back at the other members of their impromptu defensive force. Colossus, Storm, Berserker, Sunspot, Rogue, Havoc, Nightcrawler, Shadowcat, Iceman, Magma, we grabbed most of the useful ones, didn't we? Shame Peter chose this night to patrol. Scott nodded. "Although I can't say that I'm personally happy about my bro coming, he is almost as powerful as I am and we'll need him. Relative ATIS. We'll get there slightly before the Sentinels, but only just. We're talking less than 10 minutes. Scott said. "I've contacted Juggernaut and his people are evacuating as many non-combatants as possible. It seems that the universe has a sense of humor, he's using Magneto's old base as the primary shelter." Logan barked with laughter. "Magneto's base being used to save non-mutants? I'd love to see his face when he finds out." Scott briefly smiled, then slightly adjusted course, earning a quizzical look from Logan. "Jetstream may cut another minute from our ETA." "Good thinking," Logan admitted. "You think the others will be okay back at the Institute while all us heavy hitters are out here?" "They should be." Scott shrugged. "I mean, this must be the entire production run of these things. If they had more, they'd send them, right? By now, all the mutant lovers will be heading for Genosha," Creed said softly as he looked over the motionless figures awaiting orders. "You have been given your targets, the mutant school, the mutant house. The order is given, deploy and eliminate your targets. Humanity will prevail. Humanity will prevail." The massed robots echoed before they began rising into the night sky. Chapter 22, Holding the Line. Even as the turbines started to spool down, the ramp descended and Logan led the X-Men and the recruits selected to help them down to where Kane Marco was stood. "Juggernaut." "Logan." Marco replied, nodding in greeting. "I have my guardians protecting the women and children in Magneto's old base. It's almost the size of a city by itself. The army has spread out to defend the infrastructure, but that leaves the capital. With Flyboy helping." Logan started, only to be interrupted. "They have kryptonite-enhanced blasters," Clark said as he limped forwards, supported by Blink. "Kara got him back here as soon as I realized what was happening," Kara said as she walked up. "I've been helping with the evacuation while Clark recovers. It seems like it's only the ones looking more human that have the kryptonite beams. The basic model are still easy for us to take down when they're not being protected." "Understood," Scott said. "When are we expecting, oh hell?" For a long moment, everyone went silent at the sight of the large cloud of lights moving towards them, then Scott started giving orders. "Kara, you're on recovery duties. Anyone goes down, get them out of there. Clark, you as well once you recover. Going to need some sunlight for that. Or the sun lamps from the Blackbird? Clark noted and Scott nodded as a red glow started to form around his visor. Storm, Sunspot, you're our air cover. Any other flight-capable mutant with a ranged attack or who can use rifles, get up there as well. Berserker, start charging up. Havoc, with me, let's force them down. Stepping forwards, Scott glanced at his brother, who was concentrating on pouring power into his chest plate, making the circle glow brighter than he had ever seen it glow before. I've got the left. Scott noted. I'll take the right. Havoc replied, raising his fists. We stand together against all odds. Scott started with a grin. We'll face down men, demons, and gods. Havoc joined in with a grin just as wide as his brother's. We stand for what's right and they will find that they will fall as it's summer's time. They both roared, unleashing blasts of energy that scythed through the higher levels of the incoming horde. Juggernaut's eyes widened as lines of explosions marked the destruction of several dozen of the incoming enemies before the remainder dived forwards the ground. What was that rhyme? Bobby Drake asked and Scott chuckled self-consciously. We played at being heroes when we were younger. Havoc laughed as he continued blasting the descending sentinels. That was our intro speech. I kinda liked it. Ray said. Then he stepped away from the others as arcs of electricity started to leap off him and hit the ground. Ready to fight, and I love this suit. They're coming. A voice shouted and Marco stepped forwards, breaking into a run. Who do you think you are, invading my island? He roared. Don't you know who you're pissing off? I'm the Juggernaut. A massive impact sounded on the last word and Scott fired another blast, illuminating the approaching metal giants, the foremost of which was in the process of falling as Juggernaut ripped its leg off. Open fire! Scott yelled as Berserker fired a horizontal lightning bolt at the invaders. A moment later, the air itself seemed to split as various energy blasts and projectiles sleeted at the robots. My. Magneto mused. A second wave, headed for Genosha. Well, let's see what we can do about this. The flying robots suddenly found themselves transfixed in the sky, then they started to break apart even as a flying figure began smashing through them. Within minutes, the only thing left in the skies were the two men and the limbless body of the deactivated Centurion that had been leading the robotic attackers. I will have you examined closely and find out what I need to know. Magneto gloated. And since it looks from here like things are not going as badly as I feared. Come, Bizarro. It is time for you to meet your teammates. Colossus, fastball special. Logan snapped and Colossus grabbed the shorter man and spun round before releasing him. Flying through the air, Logan extended his claws as he flew, plunging them into the optics of one of the purple and red robots before dropping down and decapitating it. Dodging the stamping feet and blasts of the other sentinels, Logan managed to activate his COMM. The colored ones are the control bots. Take them out and their unit coordination goes to hell. He shouted. Even as he did, a new sentinel landed in the group, this one looking like the normal ones but with reddish gold highlights. Oh hell, this ain't good. Havoc frantically poured energy into his left gauntlet, generating a large shield even as 4 sentinels opened fire on him in unison. The energy blasts hammered into the shield, forcing Havoc down onto one knee, but he kept the shield solid. Suddenly the fire slackened and he glanced up in time to see the 4th sentinel's torso vanish in a purple flash, leaving the limbs to collapse in a pile and then Blink collapsed against him. Can't do that too often. She panted. Sent them away. You did good. Havoc smiled as a missile detonated harmlessly against his shield. Just get your strength back. Thanks. Juggernaut yelled as he charged the invaders again, but this time, they were ready for him. Instead of him smashing through several of them and leaving their scattered pieces in his wake, Juggernaut felt the ground beneath him explode, sending him arcing into the air, and then a giant metal tentacle caught his foot. Oh fuck. Phew. The ground seemed a bit more solid than he was used to and Juggernaut blinked away the clods of earth obscuring his vision as the earth flew away from him, then the ground slammed into his back before he arced up into the sky again, hurtling downwards before the tentacle suddenly unwrapped, sending him plowing into the ground. Pulling himself up, he shook his head to clear it. Father. Polaris? What are you doing here? Helping you. His adopted child replied, her face set in stubborn determination. Juggernaut sighed and pointed. Get behind that man's shield and use your powers from there. If things go to hell, get Blink to safety. Yes, father. Polaris responded and, pausing just long enough to send a magnetic blast that ripped the nearest sentinel's arm off, she scurried away. Of all the times for teenage rebellion. Juggernaut sighed as he prepared himself for another charge. Well, at least Blink'll take her somewhere safe if things go bad. Heh. Furginasha. This time, the sentinel he targeted didn't see him coming. Steve caught his shield and absently sidestepped the falling sentinel head even as an armored mutant lumbered past, leaping up to grapple the next sentinel. Boost me. Steve crouched and placed his shield on his shoulders, then explosively straightened as he felt a weight land on him. Looking up, he saw the cat-like woman who had used him as a springboard land lightly on another sentinel's head and plunge a long dagger, one verging on being a sword, into its right optic, pulling it out in a shower of sparks. The sentinel seemed to freeze before toppling backwards while the cat lady somersaulted backwards, landing silently beside Steve. Thanks for the boost. Name's Tigra. Steve Rogers, but most call me Captain America. Tigra nodded. Glad you're here. You know they regard you as an honorary mutant, same as me. Steve blinked a few times, then smiled. Since I owe my life to a mutant, it's a great privilege. Less talking, more smashing. Juggernaut roared as he ran past them, leaping into the air to tackle another sentinel. He has a point. Steve admitted. Tigra hissed in reply as she crouched, then bounded into the ever-growing melee. Steve grinned and turned to find his own target. Scott inhaled deeply as he stepped back to recharge his boost. On one side of his HUD, the line indicating his supercharge capability started to rise again as his constant blast was diverted into the external holding field. Scott, how are you doing? Up to 30% of maximum. Scott replied. Normal blast is too wasteful, but I haven't got the angle for a Shatterfire cone, whoa. You have now. Superman said as he grabbed Scott and lifted them both into the air. Tell me where. Just get me a clear view of the battlefield and someone to tell everyone to fall back before I fire. Siren'll spread the warning, just tell me when. Oh hell. Superman instantly went evasive as a barrage of bolts lanced up at them, then a red, gold, and white-clad man was beside them, firing blasts of plasma back down. Who are you? Scott shouted and the man glanced at them briefly. Name is Sunfire, Cyclops San, and I am the one showing you how this is done. He shouted before increasing his blasts. Scott shook his head and triggered his COMM. This is Cyclops. Someone tell Siren to spread the word to fall back so I can open fire. For a long moment, nothing happened, then a female voice echoed across the battlefield. Fall back. Fall back. Scott waited for the HUD-highlighted mutants below to start their withdrawal before he grinned. It's Summer's time. He whispered as his visor flashed red. Bloody. Freaking. Hell. Havoc breathed in awe as literally millions of red energy darts rained down on the sentinels, each dart slicing deeply into its target. Within seconds, the robot's advance had halted and the red rain continued to slice down, each impact a part of the orchestra of destruction whose music shook the ground. Way to go, bro. Your brother is doing that. Blink gasped as several sentinels detonated due to the damage to their power cores. Yeah, but I've never seen him do this much damage before. Alex laughed. Way to go, bro. It's Summer's time. Wahoo. A burning sentinel staggered forwards and Alex's blast severed it just above the waist even as Polaris used her powers to rip its arms off. The shattered remnants collapsed even as the red rain finally stopped, revealing a plain filled with smoking, half-melted piles of scrap metal. Damn! Juggernaut rumbled from behind them. I gotta recruit him for the Guardians. I wanna know how the hell he got up there. Alex half moaned. I mean, I can fly because of my boots, but he can't. What's going on? Superman. Blink stated as Scott and Clark touched down nearby. Whoa! Juggernaut breathed. Am I glad you never did that to me? Cyclops Dono, how in the name of the 1,000 commies did you do that? Sunfire demanded as he landed. Suddenly the area was illuminated by a beam of light lancing down from the heavens, a beam that dissipated to show a group of figures ready for a fight. For a long moment, no one moved. Ah hell. Tony Stark sighed as he raised the faceplate of his armored suit. We missed the party, didn't we? Steve grinned, then his gaze settled on a familiar figure standing by him. I forgot to ask, you implied you weren't a mutant, correct? Long story. Tigra sighed. Xavier looked out of his study window as a large humanoid shape loomed on the periphery of the Institute's grounds, then a figure seemed to scurry up it and the giant's head was removed with a horrendous screeching sound. Several seconds passed, then a voice called. Hello. I took care of all those big, nasty robots for you, but I'm rather hungry. Can you give me something to eat? Xavier blinked at the figure illuminated by the gate lights, then it turned and a tail came into view. Squirrel Girl. Xavier breathed as he triggered the lock for the gates, allowing her to enter. Reaching out, he triggered the intercom. Please come in. My name is Charles Xavier and I thank you for saving my school. Yay. She shouted. I finally found Beefcake Man's place. Charles face palmed. 107 deaths and over 100 injured. Juggernaut sighed as he slumped on his throne. It could have been far, far worse, but, over 200. We knew what we were getting into, Father. Polaris said, one hand lightly brushing the bandage that covered the gash in her side. But we have proven that Genosha will not fall. S.H.I.E.L.D. is already sending medical supplies. Captain America stated as he returned his communicator to its belt pouch. Nick Fury asks if you would be kind enough to let us examine some of the wreckage from the battle. Sure. Juggernaut shrugged. Most of it will be recycled and repurposed for other uses. I really need to get better armor for my remaining Guardians, using the plating of those things seems like a good idea. Any idea who sent those damned things? Not at this time. A new voice said and Nick Fury strode into the throne room. King Marco. I do not believe we have officially met before. Director Nick Fury of S.H.I.E.L.D. Supergirl gave me a lift so I could get here quickly. You want to see the battlefield? Later. Fury said as he turned to face Clark. I have news and a warning for you. Another group of Sentinels tried to attack the Institute, but they were all destroyed. Good to know the defenses work. Clark said, then he frowned as Nick shook his head. The defenses didn't have a chance. It was Squirrel Girl, and last I heard, she was waiting to meet you again. Everyone watched in amused bemusement as Clark turned to the nearest wall and started to gently headbutt it. Chapter 23, Alliances. We still have no idea of who sent these things, but once we find out, Genosha will petition the United Nations to put them on trial on charges of attempted genocide. Clark tore his attention away from the television screen and the statement from Tigra, the official Genoshan ambassador. His gaze fell on the young-tailed woman who was happily demolishing a place of hazelnut cookies, occasionally passing fragments up to the squirrel perched on her shoulder. We've been swapping stories about you. Mystique said as she gratefully accepted a cup of tea from Martha. You know that she took out two groups of those things, one headed here and the other was trying to take down the Brotherhood. First thing I knew of it was when Xavier phoned me to ask if I was alright. You have my thanks. Clark said as Squirrel Girl looked up at him. Taking down two entire squads of those things, it couldn't have been easy. It was fun. Squirrel Girl laughed. Hey, any openings on your team? Clark froze and Mystique hid a chuckle. She is a mutant, you know. Yep, like you. No, not like him, Doreen. Mystique corrected. He's an alien from the now-destroyed planet Krypton. Oh. Doreen said even as Clark asked Doreen. Clark Kent, also known as Superman, meet Doreen Green, also known as Squirrel Girl. Mystique laughed. We have met before. Superman sighed. Her squirrel avalanche is quite disconcerting. I got pictures of that. Doreen chirped and Clark froze in horror as his mother opened the proffered envelope and started laughing. A click caught his attention and his eyes snapped round to where a squirrel was standing on the windowsill, holding a camera. What the? So, can I join? Clark blinked a few times. Let me make a few calls first. Detective Mazza. Professor Xavier said in greeting as the coffee-skinned woman entered his study. How may I be of assistance? Please, call me Elisa. She said as she sat down. I hear that you know Superman. I do. Xavier said, briefly scanning the surface emotions of the woman before him. May I ask why? Because I have some friends who are in trouble and could use some help. Elisa sighed. I assume you know about David Xanatos. The multi-billionaire who a while ago served jail time for becoming involved in receiving stolen goods. That's him. A while back he purchased a castle and moved it to the top of his skyscraper. Yes, I was aware of that. Well, he did it to break a curse. Elisa explained. You see, 1,000 years ago. Superman. Fury. Clark nodded. Sorry for showing up unannounced, but I have a problem. How many metas and mutants do you have who were seriously considered for inclusion into the Avengers? About 7, not including you. Fury said slowly, why? I need to put together a new team, fast. Clark said. I was thinking about calling them the Defenders, or something like that, and putting them on the West Coast with one of my recovered embassy modules as a base for them. And once there, in addition to missions assigned by you, they can be used as a training cadre to test and train other metas that we think might have the potential or who want to become heroes. Fury pondered the concept for a few long moments before asking the question that was most urgent to him. I approve of the concept, but what brought this on? Simple. Clark said, his eyes reflecting his desperation. I need somewhere that isn't the X-Men to put Squirrel Girl, and she doesn't speak Japanese, so I can't dump her with the Henshin Rangers. Fury stared at him for a few long moments, then he collapsed against the control console as he shook with laughter. Superman glared at him, then turned and walked away. And that's how it is. Elisa finished. So, you want my help in protecting your friends, these gargoyles, finding out if there are any others around other than the clan in Japan, the one in England and the few in the rainforests, and providing them with a safe haven since you are not certain that their current location is still secure. I know it's a lot to ask, especially since you don't. All right. Elisa blinked. What? I own several properties in Manhattan, including several penthouse suites. I am quite happy for your friends to use one as their base of operations. In return, though, I would ask that they allow certain recruits of mine to work alongside them on occasion and that should they feel that they may be outmatched, that they do not hesitate to call for help. Elisa stared at him and Xavier wheeled himself out from behind his desk. Let me show you to the Hall of Doors and from there, we can go to meet this clan of yours. Elisa allowed herself to be led out of the door, only to pause as a crying dark-haired girl with a white streak in her hair ran towards them and caught Xavier in a hug. Rogue. I see it works then. Congratulations. Rogue nodded several times, then straightened up, glancing at Elisa in curiosity. Anna Kent, this is Detective Elisa Mazza. Elisa, this is Rogue. She has a power which, if not suppressed, means that she cannot risk touching anyone except under certain circumstances. Rogue. Have you been hugging of everyone, mawing up for lost time? Rogue smiled, wiping away the tears trickling down her cheeks. It's wonderful. Excellent, Rogue. Excellent. Xavier smiled, holding her hands as he did so. Rogue's smile got wider. Thank Professor. Of course. Have you told Martha yet? Rogue gasped and sprinted off, leaving Elisa staring wide-eyed and Xavier chuckling. Since her power activated, there have only been a few immune to her power. Now, she is able to touch once again. Anyway, we were going to the Hall of Doors, this way please. Superman is busy at the moment, but I'll send him a message and have him meet us. Elisa stared as Xavier vanished into the seemingly solid stone rectangle. Swallowing, she stepped forwards, feeling the stone ripple around her like the surface of a pond, then she emerged the other side into a giant sphere with similar stone rectangles set in frames on floating platforms connected to balconies that ringed the sphere. In the middle, holographic images of several different icons floated in a ring, amongst them the circled four of the Fantastic Four, a circled X, an S in a diamond, the Avengers circled A and an angular bird with its wings extended. Welcome to the Hall of Doors, courtesy of Heimdall and Thor of Asgard. Xavier explained. Superman started to build this place a while ago and he completed it after the Genosha incident. If you look over there, you can just make out Sanctuary. Elisa followed his gaze and then her eyes widened as she realized that the entire kilometer-wide structure was underwater. Now, this particular platform is the X-Men section. Xavier said, and Elisa glanced down, spotting the circled X inlaid into the floor. If your friends accept our alliance, the penthouse door will be moved to its own platform which will be marked with the insignia of the Gargoyles clan. Each platform is protected by force fields and whatever security features the group in question wishes to install, while the entire dome can be flooded if all else fails. If you will follow me. Elisa swallowed and followed the wheelchair-bound professor through another stone monolith. Lord Magneto, your lunch. Magneto responded almost absently as he watched Tecmage probing the various pieces of technology that interfaced with the crystal. Your lunch, Lord Magneto. Chrome repeated. You must keep your strength up. He's right, Pops. Quicksilver said, appearing beside the lead acolyte. You don't want to lose all that new energy of yours. Fine. Magneto sighed as he floated away from the partially disassembled robotic head and rose to the balcony from which Chrome was surveying the workshop. It was just getting interesting. Tecmage has decrypted several very interesting files. Oh. Magneto's son asked as he helped himself to one of the carrot sticks, ignoring Chrome's glare. Such as the location of the secret factory that is creating those things. Magneto smirked. Soon, we will have an army so that we may lead mutant kind into the future. Cool. Quicksilver said as he grabbed another carrot stick. Army, great. Army. Indeed. Magneto gloated. Elisa smiled as her friend, and leader of the Gargoyles, Goliath shook hands with Superman and then Xavier. It is good to have new allies. He rumbled. Our allies in the Labyrinth clan, Elisa Mazza, and now the X-Men. Yeah, and your tech is amazing. Chirped Lexington. Superman smiled at his excitement. Remind me to introduce you to Peter and Forge. I think you'll get along very well. Now, if I understand it, you cannot actually fly, only glide, yes. A few nods answered his query and Superman smiled. I happen to have a few ideas about that. A small counter-gravity generator on your belt and you'll be able to truly fly. Really? Lexington gasped and Superman nodded. Wow. Dawn is on its way and we must return to the rest of the clan to give them the news. Goliath rumbled. Tomorrow night, we shall relocate to here with your permission. I'll give Elisa the belt units and instruction sheet for you. Superman smiled. It's an honor to be allied with you. And with you. Goliath responded as he scooped Elisa into his arms. Fare thee well, scion of Krypton. Superman watched as Goliath and Lexington leapt from the balcony, their wings snapping out to carry them into the night. Another sentient species on Earth. I never guessed. I could not read them. Xavier admitted. I could sense their presence, but now you know what to look for, you can use Cerebro to search for more of them. Superman finished. Do you want to go back through the hall, or shall I give you a ride? Xavier smiled. I think a flight through the night sky may help me to order my thoughts. Gargoyles. Nick Fury repeated, his expression a curious mixture of disbelief and acceptance. Superman introduced me to their leader. Steve Rogers said. They've allied themselves with the X-Men, but they're a purely nocturnal group. I see. Fury nodded. I wonder if I can recruit one for the Howling Commandos. I wouldn't. Steve shrugged. As I said, they're purely nocturnal. They literally turn to stone during the day. Really? Fury mused. How interesting. Get Mazza here now. Captain Maria Chavez half-shouted as she stared at the smiling figures before her. After a moment, she frowned. You, I recognize, she said, pointing at Superman, but the others are recruits. Superman smiled. They're tagging along since this is a milk run mission. You came in dragging 4 bank robbers and call it a milk run. Chavez frowned. What the heck do you call challenging? Superman exchanged a glance with the teen who boasted a glowing circle on his chest. Defending Genosha. I see. Chavez sighed. And your recruits are? Oh, my apologies. This is Havoc, the recruit with the chest circle nodded, and this is, did we ever decide on a code name other than X-23? The younger teen looked blank for a moment. Wolverine. That's your father. And I'm not certain that that code name would suit you. Well, we'll figure it out later. She's Wolverine's daughter. Chavez gasped. What else, is she a ninja or something? Ninja. Aha. Kunoichi. Superman said with a smile. Means female ninja. That do. The newly named Kunoichi shrugged, then she spun round, 2 claws extending from each hand, as the door behind them opened. Whoa. Easy, Kunoichi. Detective Maza, here is the information and the communicator you requested. Superman said, handing over the satchel that he had been holding to the woman who had just entered, triggering Laura's response. You might like to know that the professor has had several discussions with your brother, but he does not know how to reverse the process. With Severius dead, that doesn't surprise me. Elisa said with a sad shrug. I'll check this out later. Superman turned back to Chavez and hid a smile at her exasperated, questioning look. Elisa Maza recently aided the X-Men in a mission. He said. Since introducing an ally could be seen as a mission, it wasn't exactly a lie. The bag contains several important pieces of information regarding a personal matter and a few other things that will allow her to call upon the X-Men if she needs help. Chavez slowly nodded. All right. That could be useful, but I don't like vigilantes in my city. Superman smiled. But we aren't. After all, vigilantes take the law into their own hands, meting out whatever punishment they deem fit. We on the other hand detain those who break the law and hand them over to the duly appointed officers of the law to be dealt with by those who are tasked with such things. Completely different. Chavez scowled for a moment, then nodded unwillingly. Besides, Superman added, Nick Fury likes us. Cave's eyes widened in shock. Nice place. Hudson admitted almost unwillingly as he looked around. The chairs look a bit odd. They weren't like that last night. Lexington mused, then he sat down and leaned back. Hey. They've been changed so they don't cramp our wings. Your wings, at least. Brooklyn said as he followed suit. Wow, they don't cramp my wings either. Lexington bounced out of his chair and scurried over to the corner where a large computer station was positioned. Wow, this looks cool. Is that a holographic display? So, what is the price for this place? Hudson asked and Goliath looked at him. We help to train others to become guardians, humans with powers and abilities verging on magic, but not magic. Warriors, huh? Hudson mused. I can go with that. Wow. Broadway called. The kitchen's really stocked. Hey, Angie, what do you want for dinner? Chapter 24, Outed. Clark looked up as the door to his room slammed open, revealing his adopted son's panicked face. Kal, you've been outed. It's on the news. Clark froze and Laura appeared behind Chris. Father says you need to get to Geek's Lair. Peter is putting report together. Clark nodded and rose from his seat, switching off his computer. All right. You want to come? Clark. Peter nodded, his face intent as his fingers almost flew over the keyboard, the projected screens in front of him flickering as he accessed various boards and forums. The genie's out, no way to put it back short of time travel, and I don't think that that's gonna happen. Looks like the original leak was Senator Kelly's office. Forge is trying to backtrack to see exactly where the info came from, but it's bad. I wouldn't advise going into Bayville anytime soon. Clark nodded, then his gaze settled on a screen showing a growing crowd outside the gates of the Institute. We're going to need to do some serious public relations on this. He noted and Peter nodded. I've already called in some help from where I used to work. Robbie owes me a favor or two for my work on the Daily Bugle and clearing his son. I've asked him to come and do an interview. He'll come over this afternoon and we should be able to get it into tomorrow's paper. Yeah, but what about the others? Clark worried. I mean, with me connected with the institute, what about the others? I am already on it, Xavier said from the doorway. Several of the students wish to keep their abilities quiet for now while others want to go public. Ray mentioned that it would help him since, in his words, chicks dig superheroes. Clark managed not to laugh at the sheer incongruity of Xavier repeating Berserker's comment. I will have a list of those willing to go public by the time that this Robbie arrives, Xavier concluded. Kara's been outed too. So has Chris, unfortunately, Peter noted, then he laughed. Oh my, they think Martha's a Kryptonian too. Nope, no Kryptonian could ever cook as well as she does. Clark shot back, then he sighed. This is going to lead to trouble, Mr. Kent, the distinguished black man said, offering his hand, and then he glanced behind Clark. Peter. Mr. Robinson. Please, call me Robbie. Thank you for agreeing to an interview. I just wish it was unnecessary. Clark sighed and Robbie nodded. Fame can be a problem, especially unwanted fame. Robbie agreed. So, are we ready? Cameras are on. Forge waved from behind his console. We can cut and splice afterwards to get the interview flowing smoother for the viewers, but we're ready. All right, Robbie said as he sat down. Ready. Starting in 5. Forge said. 4, 3, 2. Robbie waited for Forge to drop his hand before he smiled at the main camera. This is Joseph Robertson for Daily Bugle, live at the Xavier Institute for the Gifted. With me is Superman, who has recently had his private identity revealed. Superman, your thoughts on that? Clark inhaled slightly before answering. Due to my powers, there is no true additional threat to me now that those who dislike me know my name. However, the release of my identity means that I now need to worry about those around me. Anyone near me is now at risk from the maniacs and bigots who see me as an enemy. Bigots who now know you're a mutant, Robbie said knowingly, then he looked surprised as Clark shook his head. Sadly, I am not a mutant. To be a mutant, one must be human, and I am not. You're not. Robbie managed, and Superman smiled. Let me tell you a story of loving parents on a world called Krypton. Knowing that their race had unknowingly doomed their world and having had their warnings ignored, they built a small spacecraft and used it to send their only child to another world, a world where that child would be safe. A world named Earth. Before Krypton exploded, they flung a light into the darkness. That child was me, and my birth parents were Jor of the House of El and his wife, Lara Lorvan, who sacrificed their chance of living so that I could survive. Robbie stared at him in silence. I was found and adopted by Jonathan and Martha Kent, who took me in and raised me as their own. As my powers manifested, they helped me to learn to control them, and they taught me that my powers came with a price, that having my gifts meant that I should use them to help others. After my Earth father died, Martha showed me the craft that I had arrived in, and from it, I learned my heritage as the last son of Krypton. I was approached by Professor Xavier, who asked me for help. He had set up this place both for normal humans and those with powers, but he needed someone to act as an older brother to them, a mentor who was strong enough that whatever powers emerged, he would still be able to offer support and help. As a Kryptonian, I am immune to almost every X-gene power discovered so far. Naturally, I agreed, as long as my mother was offered a place on the staff as well. After building the Javelin, I took it on a trip to the ruins of Krypton and its sister planet Argo. Krypton is now an asteroid field with almost nothing left of the once great civilization that it once housed, and in its death it took Argo with it, but I discovered that some Argosians had survived, sleeping in protective stasis. I brought them back and managed to revive Kara Zor-El, whom you know as Supergirl. She was the one least affected by a certain poisonous mineral called kryptonite, hence why we were able to bring her back. In my time here, I have fought alongside the Avengers and been offered a place in their ranks, a place which my cousin has since accepted. I have led the X-Men on several missions and watched with pride as Cyclops has grown into the leader that I always knew he could be. I have given support to the Henshin Rangers who protect Japan and have flown into battle by their side. I have worked with the Fantastic Four, helping them to repair and expand their space station on which many new discoveries have been made. I was honored to be counted amongst those who protected the innocents of Genosha from the robotic army sent to destroy them, and I watched as Cyclops unleashed all of his power in what has since been called the Red Rain. I have saved many from certain death, helped those who needed it and brought hope to those in despair. And in doing so, I have become something of an icon. Many mutants now, instead of fearing their abilities, now use them as they should be used, to help others, to give aid and protection to those who need it. I have spoken to a few of them, and been told that I inspired them in some way. It is my dream that when I finally die, I will have made the world a better place for all. A finer world is a dream to live for. For almost a minute, Robbie simply stared at him, then he shook his head to refocus himself. That is quite a story. Superman shrugged slightly and Robbie took another steadying breath. So, to change the subject slightly, Xavier's Institute. Are all the students here mutants? No. Clark said with total honesty, since Ileana was a normal human, Chris was a Kryptonian, or more accurately, an Argosian, and Peter was an Enhancel. While we do have mutants amongst our number, we also have those who are not, both amongst students and faculty, and we do not differentiate between them. Scott parked his car and glanced round at the suddenly motionless students. Damn it! He cursed quietly, rubbing his eyes in irritation. Looks like we've become the center of attention. We knew it would happen at some point. Jean agreed, then she froze. Scott followed her gaze and saw Duncan glaring at her, a sneer fixed on his face before he turned and stalked off. I don't. Scott started before stopping, unable to fully put his feelings into words as Jean watched her former boyfriend walk away with an expression of loss and sadness. I wonder how Paul and Taryn will cope. Scott said instead. Last time, they didn't take it all that well. Last time, they didn't have Clark's interview on the TV. Scott noted, then he looked up at their approaching friends. They look nervous, though. Yeah. Scott sighed as he climbed out of his car. You know, I'm suddenly very grateful for this watch. It means I can now make eye contact. Jean blinked and then slapped her forehead. So that's what's been bugging me, you're not wearing your shades. Scott managed to turn his laughter into a rather unconvincing coughing fit as Jean glared at him. Sorry, it's just. Yeah. Jean said with a wry smile. Sorry. A sudden round of gasps and cheering caught their attention and they looked up to see Clark and Kara flying overhead, waving at the students. Why are they doing that? Because they have agreed to do a question and answer session for the whole school during first period. Hank McCoy answered from behind them. If you look over there, you'll see that several news agencies have sent reporters to cover it. Scott glanced over at the quartet of vans with variously shaped satellite dishes atop them. I see. I wonder where Ray and Roberto are? I don't see them getting out of the minibus. They wanted to go public. Jean reminded him. Roberto'll probably fly them both in. I must admit that knowing that mutants do exist is quite exhilarating. McCoy noted, earning a surprised look from both teens. After all, there are more things in heaven and earth than are explained by our philosophies, to misquote the bard. You and your classics. Jean half laughed as Clark and Kara landed in front of Principal Kelly and shook hands with him. I would suggest that you head in while everyone is distracted. McCoy advised and Scott nodded. Good idea. Come on, Jean. And so Superman and his cousin Supergirl have agreed to appear at Bayville High today. The excited reporter near Scott and Jean stated excitedly. We are also joined by a student of the Xavier Institute, Peter Parker. Mr. Parker, the public has to know, are you a mutant as well? No, I'm not. Peter smiled. However, I am proud to be friends with those who are and I have helped them out whenever I could. My skills with electronics and anything internet related have come in handy a time or two. I'm the one that revamped the Institute's web page, rebuilding it from the basic coding upwards. What can you tell us about life in the Institute, and have you met Cyclops? I have met Cyclops, and he's a really nice chapter. Peter grinned. In fact, I helped with the programming on his latest visor, increasing the accuracy of the targeting software. My aunt, who is one of the fully human adults there, is the Institute's archivist amongst her other duties. And Clark's mother? Will we be seeing her flying around? Peter burst out laughing, finally managing to regain the ability to speak. Martha? I thought you already knew from Clark's interview, she's as human as anyone can be, although we all joke that she's a mutant with the power of being the best cook on the planet. She adopted Clark when he was a baby and raised him to be, in all senses of the term, a Superman. Everyone at the Institute admires her. So your aunt and Clark's mother are both members of the Institute? Who else is there? Aside from Professor Charles Xavier who runs the place, there's Aurora Monroe who acts as a confidant for the younger students, Pyotr Rasputin who is a former Russian strongman who joined after Clark helped to heal his younger sister Ilyana, and then there's Logan. Wolverine. He's an old friend of the professor's and teaches us self-defense and general fitness. Peter shrugged. He spars with Clark quite a bit. Clark himself acts as a mentor, and his power means that should there be an accidental power discharge, his virtual immunity to it means that he can keep the situation under control. What about the students? Peter paused for a moment, then shrugged. If you mean what's the ratio of mutants to mundanes, I can confirm that over a fifth of the people at the Institute have powers. Note that sometimes the powers are more trouble than they're worth. For instance, a constant fiery aura might seem awesome at first, but it would mean that you would never be able to receive a hug and walking through a field would set it on fire. A fifth. Scott whispered to Jean in confusion and she smiled. He said over a fifth, she whispered back, he didn't say how much more than a fifth it was. And with Roberto and Ray going public combined with Clark and Kara being outed, most people will think there are maybe only one or two other mutants at the Institute. Scott's eyes widened in sudden understanding. And with Logan already known, my God, that's brilliant. A sudden roar of cheering announced the appearance of Clark and Kara on the stage, along with Principal Kelly, who stepped up to the lectern and tapped the microphone. Is this thing on? Good morning ladies, gentlemen, students, and visitors. I am honored to introduce two of Bayville's most famous residents, our very own part-time chemistry teacher, physical education teacher and superhero, Clark Kent, and his cousin, Kara Kent. Another huge roar of applause echoed across the school fields, dying as Kelly raised a hand. Clark and Kara have agreed to come today to answer some of our questions and introduce a couple of their friends. Behind him, a dark figure wrapped in a golden aura rose from the trees, one hand holding onto the wrist of a second figure. The two flew across and landed on the stage just as Clark took the microphone. You have seen these two before, both during the New York incident and the defense of Genosha. The first two publicly known members of the group known as Generation X, may I present Berserker and Sunspot, known to you as Ray Carter and Roberto da Costa. Ray pulled off his domino mask as Roberto cancelled his aura and the two of them waved at the crowd as Clark continued speaking. It was their decision to go public with their powers and I respect them for it, even if one of the reasons listed for doing so was chicks dig superheroes. A burst of laughter rolled across the fields. As such I have to tell you, yes ladies, they are still single and Ray can even recharge your iPods for you. Another burst of laughter erupted as Ray glared at the Kryptonian in mock outrage. Chapter 25, Schooling. Laura sighed as the minibus vanished through the gates, then she looked round at the slight chuckle from behind her. You've really got attached to the little tyke, haven't you? Logan asked rhetorically and Laura sighed again as she nodded. He is nice to be around. I cannot hurt him with. Logan nodded as Laura held up her hand with her claws extended. And you still dislike social situations? They put you on edge. Again Laura nodded. I am grateful that I can finish education here. Yeah, Chuck's good at teaching. Logan allowed. The fact your instincts don't class him as a threat is a bonus. Laura nodded slowly and Logan turned and motioned for her to follow him. Flyboy's been upgrading the programming on the training rooms. He's managed to get several new missions programmed, so let's give them a run through. Yes, Father. Logan jolted to a halt and stared at Laura with wide eyes. What? Logan blinked several times before shaking his head to refocus. Sorry. It's just, that's the first time that you've actually called me that. A burst of laughter echoed down the hall as Ray and Roberto walked down it, surrounded by over half a dozen girls as well as a couple of male hangers-on. Scott shook his head as Jean leaned against him, her arms folded. I think that they are taking too much advantage of their fame. She sighed and Scott grinned. I agree. Clark's going steady with Mystique while Kara, isn't she with Steve? I think I heard something about that. She is. Jean confirmed. She came to me for help in dressing for a date. Steve was taking her to a 40s dance. A place he'd feel very comfortable at. Scott noted. Did she enjoy it? Very much so. Jean laughed. Oh, hello Taryn. Jean, Scott. Taryn replied as she watched the two publicly acknowledged mutants and their fangirls go past. Those two seemed to be enjoying things a little too much. We were just saying that ourselves. Scott chortled. I'm still finding it hard to believe that Clark is Superman. Taryn gushed. No wonder he was so good at PE. He helped Berserker and Sunspot upgrade their powers. Scott added. He was running Roberto through some aerial maneuvers yesterday, teaching him things like avoiding incoming fire, high-speed low-level flying and rescuing civilians from high places. I know, I was asked to be one of the civilians. Can you fly? Paul asked from behind them and Scott shook his head. Nope, I'm limited to the ground. No flying, levitation, super speed, teleportation or anything else like that for me. Although I am okay at sprinting. Paul nodded as he opened his locker and pulled out several books. Those two are grabbing all the girls for themselves. Won't last. Scott shrugged. As more mutants reveal themselves and join the various super teams around the world, the novelty value will decrease. Quite right, brother. Alex stated, causing several of the group to jump in shock. I mean, I hear that almost half of the Henshin Rangers are mutants and so is one of the Avengers. What, really? Paul asked curiously. Wow, imagine that. What's it like living with mutants and Superman? Well, you have to be ready to run if something goes wrong, otherwise it's freaking neat. Alex grinned. Clark lets us use his computer for games and so on, think Star Trek holodeck. Oh man, why didn't you show that to me last time I visited? Paul asked and Scott sighed. It would have raised far too many questions. At the time, Clark was still only Clark to all of you. Paul nodded slowly as Taryn giggled. Is Clark seeing anyone? He is rather cute. He's dating a shapeshifter named Mystique. Jean said quickly. Since his powers include X-ray vision, he knows that what is on the surface isn't important. Mystique was quite freaked at first that Clark could always recognize her, no matter her shape. Another voice said and Lance Alvarez stepped forwards. Lance Alvarez, independent mutant allied loosely to the X-Men and Generation X. Also known as Avalanche. Seismic control. Hi. Taryn managed and Lance smiled at her. I take it you're a friend of Jean's? She's good people. Of course, anyone who studied under the Boy Scout is. I trained under Mystique, personally. So you're a hero too. Lance froze for a moment. Sorta. I help guard the X-Men's backs as they go out and do all of the true hero stuff. Yeah, we cover their base for them. Todd Polanski said as he landed just next to Lance. I go by Toad, I can jump really high and I'm getting really good at fighting with a staff. He is. Lance confirmed. He's actually proving useful, if you can believe it. Hey. Fred Dukes, also called the Blob. Even Superman can't hurt me. Rumbled the third member of the trio. We call ourselves the Brotherhood and our main rule is never start a fight, but always finish it. Lance smirked. Superman trusts us and we're there if the X-Men or Generation X needs backup, but we generally prefer to keep out of the way. We don't start trouble or generally get involved if we can help it, but if we're needed, we'll be there for our friends and those who need help. Plus, we're here for any mutant who needs a place to be safe but with less rules than Xavier's. Wow. Taryn breathed and Lance grinned at Scott. Damn, the worship that this hero stuff generates is addictive. I think I finally understand why Clark does it. He does it because it's the right thing to do. Scott said quellingly. He doesn't do it for the fame. Lance laughed. Yeah, but he gets it anyway. Well, we gotta get moving, don't want to miss the first lesson. Hope to see you again. Taryn. Taryn. Lance finished smoothly, kissing the back of her hand. Jean sighed. Lance, if you do anything to hurt her, you'll get Superman and Wolverine to kick my ass. Lance finished with a large grin. I know. Xavier. Good morning, Wanda. Charles said gently and the dark-haired girl snorted. What's good about it? I'm still stuck in this place. But your control over your powers have improved. Charles said. I have an offer for you, one that gets you out of here. Wanda froze, then turned slowly to look at Charles. You're serious. I know that you dislike this place, but until recently, I didn't have anywhere that you could go to simply be yourself without risking others. Now I do. I'm listening. We call it the island and it's a refuge. If you agree, I'll have you transported there. One of my newer students, Logan's daughter. Wolverine had a brat. Wanda interrupted, her eyes wide. He does, and she's about your age. It's complicated. Xavier explained. Anyway, the island was created for Laura as a place where she could stay while the programming placed into her mind could be analyzed and removed without harming her. She still uses it on occasion when the stress of the world starts getting to her, but when I told her about your case, she agreed that you probably needed the relaxation it brings more than she does. Wanda frowned thoughtfully. Where is this island? Have you ever seen Star Trek? Wanda snorted. Yeah, it's one of the few things they let us watch. I always thought you looked a lot like that captain. I get that quite a bit. Xavier smiled ruefully. Anyway, the island is based inside a repurposed training room, somewhat similar to the Star Trek holodecks. You're shitting me? Wanda stated, then she stared at him. You're not shitting me? You have an honest-to-God holodeck. One full-sized training room, 3 smaller ones and 5 which are only 20 meters across when inactive. Xavier explained. We have a basement a little over a kilometer across which holds a surprising amount of things like that, including a power generator which lets us sell power to Bayville while still having enough that we have defenses that not even your father can penetrate. Wanda's jaw dropped briefly, then she closed her eyes and gathered her wits. All right, sounds good. I'll try it. Then I would be happy to carry you there. A new voice said and Wanda stared at the blonde in the doorway. Wanda, meet Kara Kent, also known as Supergirl. She's currently a member of the Avengers. Wanda breathed in shock. What are you doing here? Passing the time until my little cousin gets out of school. What? We've got Magento's other daughter in the basement. Scott asked in shock and Logan nodded. Wanda. She's got a weird power that changes probability to whatever she wants, as well as some telekinetic abilities which may be a subset of her main power. Chuck was teaching her how to control her powers, until recently she was in an asylum since her dad had dumped her there after her powers went haywire. She hates her old man. Wow. Scott managed. So, Pietro is probably still with Magneto, Wanda is, on the island? And Polaris is in Genosha. I wonder how many other kids he sired. Wanda hasn't found out about Polaris yet. Logan grunted. We're not sure how she'd react. This is totally messed up. Scott sighed. I wonder what else can go wrong. How about a distraction? A voice asked behind them and Scott turned with a smile to face Kara who was flanked by Hawkeye and Black Widow, the latter of whom was holding a black-haired toddler. Guys, I realized that I haven't introduced you to the youngest honorary Avenger. This cutie is Harry Romanoff Barton. Graydon Creed stared in shock as the far end of the factory peeled open, allowing a horde of figures to enter, although his attention was transfixed by the tallest of them. Father. He growled, then stepped back, missing the glance that Trask gave him. Sir. Creed glanced at the console just as an error message blinked into life, then a second one appeared. The self-destruct is gone and we cannot activate the Sentinels. He stated, glancing out through the window set into the door. We have no choice, we need to retreat. If we stay, we will die. As you say, sir. Trask said as he followed Graydon to the concealed trapdoor leading to a tunnel that wasn't on any of the plans. A few seconds after the trapdoor closed, blending into the ground, the door was kicked off its hinges and Sabretooth lunged through, sniffing the air. Report. They got away. Sabretooth growled. But I know who one of them was. I recognize his scent. Oh. My son. Sabretooth snarled. Graydon Creed. He was here and he was probably the one in charge. I should have killed him when we discovered that he had no powers. Interesting. Magneto mused as he used his powers to close the breach in the factory wall. How very interesting. Techmage. It's going to take a while, possibly a few days. Came the echoing reply as Techmage crawled into the primary computer. The firewalls on this thing are insane, almost as if they were designed with me in mind. They probably were. Sabretooth grunted. You're going up against Flatscan Creed. Shit, really? Techmage gasped. That dude's a legend, albeit for all the wrong reasons, but it gives me a place to start. Magneto nodded and turned to look out at the ranks of sentinels, over twice as many as the army that had descended on Genosha. An army for me to lead, created by my enemies. He smirked. An army of metal men, whom I shall lead to victory. And Flatscan. By now, he is probably miles away. Magneto sighed. Ah well, let us see what trophies he left for us. Where is Bizarro? I will need him soon. What about us, my lord? Chrome asked and Magneto smiled slightly. To gain ultimate power, there are two tasks that I need you to accomplish. The first is to capture Susan Storm and deliver her to Latveria. And the second, sire. I do not trust Sinister. I want his lab seized as I launch my strike. I want to be able to create my own Supermen and Supergirls to support my rule once I take control of this pathetic country. So. Trask said as he negotiated the bend in the road. Why did we retreat rather than fight? I had my gun. Magneto, Techmage, Sabretooth, Frenzy, and at least another 6 of his acolytes. Creed said, looking out of the window. By now, all the techs there are either dead or captured. Magneto tends to do his homework, damn him. A single gun would have been worse than useless. Trask nodded slowly, glancing at his boss and mentally sorting all of the questions he had into ones he could ask, ones he shouldn't and ones that he probably wouldn't get answers to anyway. May I suggest we relocate as many of our other assets as possible? Creed nodded and he reached into his jacket and pulled out a phone. An excellent suggestion. By the time they reach the docks, our factory ships will have departed. This is quite a setback, sir. Yes. Creed sighed as he scrolled through the numbers stored in his phone. Yes it is, although not as much as you may think. I wonder. Sir. Trask asked despite his better judgment. Just a thought. Creed said slowly. How well concealed was that secondary security system you installed? Trask's eyes widened in shock. He hadn't told anyone about the extra cameras that he had personally installed, so how did Graydon know about them? Trask, I thought that by now you'd have worked it out. Graydon said chidingly. I make sure to check everything I can. Yes, sir. Check the description for the links to the author.